In this video, we'll look at making custom components, but first let's look at which components might be able to come out of the standard library. So if we go to our component manager, one of the things that we should be able to see is 3-pin connectors. And this looks a lot like the 3-pin header that you're going to plug your wind speed or your wind direction sensors into. So I'm going to plug one in and show you that on my schematic I had added a custom component for my wind speed sensor, and I'd wired it up. So that's part of my net list. So if I double click on this and I name it, I had called mine U3, so you would use your part ID here. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now my connections should know which one's 5 volts, which one's ground, and which one is sensor output. So you'll want to double check this with your sensor, but so that matches my schematic here. And so I could use a standard library component for my 3-pin headers. Now, your pressure sensor, which you've probably taken a look at, should be on an 8-pin header, but it's an 8-pin, we call it dip here, and it looks just like this. So I'm going to show you the problem with the standard component the way I made my schematic, and you'll get to decide if you want to fix it or make a custom component. So I named this sensor U1, and when I check my net list, most of these are unwired because my sensor specification started with pin 4. So if I come back to my, So recall when we made our pressure sensor together, if you made yours like mine, I used the numbers on the sensor spec sheet without thinking about the standard component in my PCB software. So my pin numbers are 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12. I have to come back here, ungroup, and renumber my pins if I want to use a standard pin number. So that would be pin 1. This is pin 2. And let me just show you what happens when I make those changes. Oops. Make sure I don't grab anything extra. There we go. So we'll rename it U1, and this was the 47. I'll save. I refresh my link, and now I check, and pin 1 should be on. Oh, something's a little bit off. So at any rate, this sensor will require some fixing, square pin being pin 1, if we want to use the standard dip. Instead, we could make a custom component. So in this software, I have to consider my geometry. Here it didn't matter, here it does. So I'll place my pins. And you'll measure, it's probably 1 or 2 apart. You need to check on your sensor. And then I place a trace, but I'll make it yellow because it's not actually wires. Oops. This is probably too big, but you check for yours. And then we're going to double click here. I'm going to make this pin number 4, but I'm also going to make it square. Oops. Up here. This will be 5, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then as before, we group it. And double click to give it its component number and name. Okay. So unfortunately, I broke this one a little bit. So we're going to check here. But now it knows this pin and this pin. And so we'll have to do some deciding. Do you make a custom component or do you renumber these to be correct? So this is how you make a custom component. You can consider some standard components, and then once you have figured out how things are connected, you place your traces. So if this is plugged into the top of my board, again, I probably want to wire on the bottom. And we probably don't want hard corners in your wires. So coming off at 45s in this software is pretty normal. Okay, so that concludes custom components and how those work in PCB software.